Manchester United is officially getting a new stadium. Rather than preserving the 115 years of history at Old Trafford through renovation, the Premier League club says it will build an entirely new $2.6 billion, 100,000-seat venue in the parking lot next door. Now, this isn't necessarily surprising. Everyone knows Manchester United needs a new stadium, and the club has been discussing this for years. Drainage issues cause the roof to leak when it rains too hard. Fans and players routinely complain about the quality of the pitch, as well as the stadium's capacity, accessibility, and transportation. And health officials even had to downgrade Old Trafford's hygiene rating to 2 stars after a rodent infestation. However, some fans are saddened by the prospect of losing the history and tradition at the Theatre of Dreams. But Manchester United's new stadium should be incredible, and a club survey found that 52% of Red Devil fans want a brand new stadium anyway. Designed by UK's Foster & Partners, the 100,000-seat venue will be the largest in the United Kingdom, and the second largest soccer stadium globally, only behind Barcelona's Camp Nou. The pitch will sit 50 feet below ground level to provide fans with better sightlines, and the stadium's acoustics will be engineered to amplify crowd noise, with a 25,000 capacity single-tier red wall stand inspired by Borussia Dortmund Stadium. Manchester United co-owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe recently broke down the grand vision he gave to Norman Foster of Foster & Partners to create the world's most iconic football stadium. Here's what he had to say.
The brief to Norman Foster here was to build the world's most iconic football stadium. It had to be a stadium which was recognizable around the world. There are many, I mean, if you think today, the world's built a lot of new stadiums, hasn't it? You know, China for the Olympic Games, and the Middle East, and America, they've all built new stadiums, and they're all fancy and quite impressive in their own right. But they all sort of merge a bit into, you can't remember one from the other. They all look fancy, they're all circular or oval or whatever. But we said to Norman that we would like a stadium where when anybody in the world sees that stadium, they'll know it's Manchester United. So the second part of the request was that it had to have a really intense atmosphere, and that the people in the stadium would be as close to the pitch as we possibly could achieve. So that means you've got relatively steep sides rather than flat sides. And we wanted an intense atmosphere because at the end of the day, I think that's worth points in the league, because the more intimidating it is from the point of view of just seeing this mass of people and the sound, because it's designed acoustically to reverberate, the better that is for the club. Because at the end of the day, this is the club's ground, so we want to be winning matches at home, and we want it to be a sort of fearsome atmosphere when the competing teams come in, So it really was about the best stadium in the world, the best stadium in Europe, but better than the Bernabeu and the Nou Camp, which are both new and both really impressive, biggest in the world, intimidating, and everybody in the world would recognize it.
Now, while Manchester United's quest to build the greatest football stadium in the world is a big one, the most ambitious part of the plan is its timeline for construction. Manchester United says it can complete construction in just 5 years by leveraging modular building techniques. This is essentially a fancy way of saying they will speed up the construction process by building structures in other locations, and then shipping those structures via the Manchester Ship Canal to the final location. But these unique features are only part of the story. Like everything else in sports, Manchester United isn't building a new stadium just to improve the fan experience for club supporters. No, they are doing this to make more money and increase game day revenue to avoid bankruptcy. Despite rising salaries across the Premier League and beyond due to oil-rich Gulf states buying teams and starting leagues, Manchester United's matchday revenues have stagnated over the last 15 years. While most football clubs have doubled their revenues over that period, UEFA's Club Finance report says Manchester United's $140 million in 2024 gate revenue was only $1 million more than what it was back in 2009. Plus, when you account for inflation, you could argue that the club has actually lost matchday revenue in those 15 seasons. The best example of this growing disparity is Tottenham. The North London club was only making $50 million in matchday revenue at White Hart Lane, so they loaded up on debt to spend $1.5 billion on a new state-of-the-art 63,000-seat venue in London. Tottenham's new stadium has had a transformational impact on the club, at least financially. The club now generates $134 million in annual matchday revenue, or about $7.5 million in revenue per match day, including $1.26 million in food and drink sales alone. It's also worth mentioning that Tottenham Hotspur Stadium has hosted concerts by Beyonce and Lady Gaga, boxing matches with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, and annual NFL games through its partnership with the league. These non-soccer events typically generate around $6 million in revenue per event after expenses, and since Tottenham owns 100% of the stadium, they get to keep all of that money to themselves. This is ultimately what Manchester United wants to copy. The new stadium adjacent to Old Trafford would have more than 15,000 corporate hospitality seats priced up to $20,000 per season. They could easily sign a naming rights deal with a Middle Eastern airline or technology firm worth tens of millions of dollars annually. And non-match day events, like concerts or NFL games, could generate another $50 million in annual revenue for the stadium. The Glazer family, who is the majority owner of Manchester United, has also spent the last decade acquiring 100 acres of land around Old Trafford that could be turned into a mixed-use development. They may bring in a real estate partner to reduce the project's overall cost and risk, but this land can fit thousands of residential houses and a mix of bars, restaurants, and shops. The nearby Wharfside Metrolink station would also be expanded to handle up to 50,000 passengers per hour, creating a great economic project for the city and the club through a mixed-use development. Like most stadium projects though, this all sounds great in theory. The renderings look futuristic, and even the most cynical Manchester United fans know that the club needs to improve its financial standing if they want to compete for trophies in the long term. After all, it's been 12 years since United last won the Premier League and 17 years since they've won the Champions League. The club needs all the help it can get. However, there is just one big problem. Manchester United already has billions of dollars of debt on its balance sheet, and no one really knows how they will even pay for a new stadium. Matt Slater of The Athletic recently did a great piece breaking all of this down, but the reality is that Manchester United only has a few options. That's because the government has already said that it won't provide any taxpayer money for the stadium, and it's unlikely that Manchester United would be able to even take on enough debt to complete the project. The common response to this is that Tottenham borrowed about $1 billion in the late 2010s to complete its stadium, and that's true. However, there are two main differences between Tottenham and Manchester United. First, Tottenham borrowed the money at a fixed interest rate of 2.79%, while Manchester United would be required to take on a loan with an interest rate in the mid-sevens. And second, Manchester United already has $1.3 billion of debt on its balance sheet, and borrowing a couple $1 billion more would put interest payments above what matchday revenue would increase by, meaning that the project wouldn't even make sense after it's all said and done. Remember, the Glazer family financed the acquisition of Manchester United via a leveraged buyout in 2005. That $1 billion debt was then added to the club's balance sheet, and they have never recovered. This is primarily because the Glazer family has taken nearly $2 billion off the table through share sales, dividends, and management fees over the years, rather than using the club's excess cash to pay down its debt load. Manchester United could fund the stadium through a mix of debt and equity, but even that would be murky. Co-owner Jim Ratcliffe has already spent $1.65 billion for a 27.7% stake in the club, so it's unlikely he would want to contribute more cash for this project. I also doubt that the Glazers would dilute their ownership stake to raise additional equity. United is way too big of a cash cow that fills their family's coffers. That's why Manchester United must get creative with their funding if they want a new stadium. The most likely scenario, which Matt Slater covers in his article for The Athletic, is that Manchester United creates a special purpose vehicle for the stadium. This is an extremely common practice across professional sports today. The team would own the SPV themselves, but the SPV would control the stadium's real estate. Think of it as sort of a backdoor way for the team to take on debt or sell additional equity in the new business without diluting their stake in the club. The world's largest private equity firms would be interested in owning a piece of the stadium and its surrounding mixed-use development, and Manchester United could fund the SPV with capital by selling a future naming rights deal for hundreds of millions of dollars up front. My guess is that Manchester United will also try to reduce costs by changing the design. Stadiums typically end up looking very different from initial renderings, and Manchester United could save hundreds of millions by removing the canopy and reducing the stadium's capacity. Sure, they wouldn't be able to say that they have the second largest stadium in the world, and they would lose a really cool looking part of the design, but they would save money and still probably double matchday revenues. Another option that might seem far-fetched but needs to be considered is personal seat licenses, or PSLs for short. American sports fans are familiar with the PSL model. Fans pay a one-time fee for the right to purchase season tickets for a specific seat. A few Premier League teams offer PSLs today, but it's not as prevalent as American leagues like the NFL or MLS. And while I seriously doubt that Manchester United will end up going this route due to potential fan backlash, they could fund a large chunk of the stadium cost by pre-selling PSLs to diehard fans with deep pockets. Regardless though, Manchester United is clearly in a tough spot. Despite having the Premier League's second largest payroll, the club is currently 13th in the Premier League standings. They are not profitable and have $1 billion in debt. And Jim Ratcliffe even said that they would have gone bust by Christmas had they not fired hundreds of club employees. Increasing matchday revenue could potentially alleviate some of these concerns, but figuring out how to finance the project will only make things more challenging today. So, at the end of the day, the Red Devil will be in the details of the club's new stadium funding. Pun absolutely intended.